Advice for souls having Neptune influences. Please advise me what to do in order to be helped by the Neptune influence. As just indicated. The Neptune influences, then, are those that are close to or about water, see. In Neptune, the artistic temperament, both as to material things and the mental or spiritual relationships. Remember the beautiful ever, and look for the agreements rather than for disagreements. Do not condemn that which has not been applied, nor that self has not experienced in the same character of circumstance. Thus, never repeat that which might be harmful to anyone, even though it be only gossip for the moment. Those aspects as we find from Neptune make for those experiences that will be rather as the dealings with many that have to do with water, the sources of influence or force in materiality. Hence we will find material means, material sustenance, oft may come from the fruits of waters, or as those relationships across many waters. These bring then an influence that may needs be reckoned with, yet hold fast to that faith in him. For as he is, was, holy, so may ye be holy in him. For he hath promised to be thy counsel, thy guard, thy stay, and a very present help in trouble. Remember him also then in thy joys as well as thy sorrows, remembering him also in thy displeasures as well as thy pleasures. For where the heart is there the treasure will be also. In Neptune we find the watery sign, or those influences through which the entity made for those experiences which bring what others may term peculiarities, oddities, or the entity apparently takes a peculiar attitude or unusual attitude towards things, conditions, people, and the likes and dislikes in respect to these arise from oft that the entity may not in itself know the cause for, but is innate, yet in the application of self and self's own mental force, that is the builder, apply according to thine ideal. And let not thine condemnation bring upon thee that ye hate. For that ye hate ye become. This is the law. In Neptune, again we find the artistic temperament, those things that go as scrolls, or that would tend to be for friezes or the nature of same, should be a portion of the experience in the application. And any of those influences where water or decorations for things that float on water, or those things across bodies of water, associations with individuals who have to do with things pertaining to water, will all be a part of and a helpful force in the experience of the entity. If there is ever kept the use of constructive forces in having an ideal that is grounded in spiritual import. Just as the entity unconsciously places a great store in those things of a psychic or occult nature, without asking proofs of material nature, these are well, for, if the spiritual import is always kept, they tend to make for the beauty even in those things where dross or disappointment may be experienced by another. Not that the entity becomes then a fatalist, but knowing in whom you have believed and who is the author of same makes for the assurance of the life, the experience, the opportunity being spent and used in those directions, in which there may come a helpful influence into the experiences of others. In Neptune we find the influences such that the large bodies of water should be close to the dwelling of the entity. Specialize in those things and fields of activity in which especially the mucous membranes of the body are made a part of the activity. While the studies in the present relate to kindred natures and as related to the sympathetic and cerebrospinal nervous system, get their relationship more with the lymph and emunctory flow, and you will find the greater sensitivity, making for those abilities to make corrections that will bring not only satisfaction to self in relationships to others, but bring the greater comfort and help and aid to those whom the entity may aid in this particular experience. These influences also in Neptune make for those tendencies of the spiritual inclinations ever innate in the entity's activities, physically and mentally, while those conditions that have appeared and do appear from influence in Mars, in its correlation with those influences in the experience in the present, make for those tendencies of fear as directed by circumstance. These bring that necessity of the entity's exercising greater activity towards that which is and may be builded as the entity's standard or ideal, and the adhering closer to those principles that find expression and following closer in the pathway of him that may aid, and that may stand oft instead of self in relationships to individuals, circumstances, conditions, mental conditions and material. for these then will enable the entity through this period to find the greater development in self. In Neptune we find the construction, the building, as well as water, as well as law and order, all as parts of the experience in which the entity has had and may have force or power with others, or influence upon others. As has been the experience, and it is well to learn the lesson, it is not by might nor by power, that one gains that worth retaining, but through love, and in the sowing of the seeds of the Spirit there is brought those experiences, that are growths in thine own self, and are worth remembering. For, no, good alone lives on. That of a nature which causes resentments, distrust, animosity, is already cut from that which is creative. It is true that it may have its place in the experience of others, but it is much like the nail driven in the post. The nail, the hindrance, may be removed, but the scar remaineth. It is weakened by the mightier force. Thus is there experienced by the entity that the creative force, or God, is not in the tempest nor in the storm, nor in the loud noise, nor even in the rumbles or rumors. But that which is helpful, the more oft, is in the still small voice within. Astrologically, then, while we find these aspects influencing they are negligible in the experience at the present. For, the entity is prone to be a leader or director, at times a politician, and at times one to act in the capacity as peacemaker, yet there is the constant change. And all are necessary. For, through experience is wisdom gained. Knowledge is power if there is the wisdom to apply it in the direction that brings the fruit of the Spirit or the seed thereof. For, what the individual sows, that must it also reap. Then, let that mind ever be in thee as ye have manifested oft in thy experiences in the earth. From Neptune also we find the aversion to water and waterways, water activities, and yet there has not been a greater entity to sail the seas than this entity, in the experiences through the sojourn just previous to the present. Hence, as may be gathered, there are the needs for the tempering of the mental abilities, the physical prowess, as will be a part of the entity's activity in this sojourn, with the spiritual imports, if there will be the carrying forward of those activities to the material or mental successes which the entity is capable of accomplishing during this sojourn. In Neptune we find the interest in those things of a mystical nature, those things that are of art and of water, those things that take hold upon conditions which partake of that which does not seem to be material. Thus at times others may find the entity and its expressions as being insecure, or as ghosts or dreams of things to be that are not there, yet to the entity these are the basis of all that is. For, that which appeareth not is more sure, to those who love the Lord and his ways and his coming, than those things which partake of the earth as earthly things. Hence these are not to be condemned, but rather cherished, in that they take hold upon self in such a way that ye know in whom ye have believed, and that he is able to keep that which has been and is promised unto thee day by day. In Neptune we find both warnings and helpful forces, both virtue and vices. Then, stay close to water. It is the mother in nature, and nothing is more beautiful than the mother's love, the mother's caress even in anger or in disquietude. For, this influence is strong in the body, mind and consciousness of the entity. For, the entity, too, has known, has expressed and manifested mother love. Know, too, that in the same sign there is that of violence and of anger, that of sorrow from the words spoken. Beware of long voyages. Beware of deep water. It is that which is combined with the sun, as righteousness, that becomes creative in itself. So, in thy mind, in thy heart, in thy body, as ye cherish the beautiful, as ye cultivate same in the spirit of truth, nurturing it in the light of love, so does joy and beauty and harmony come into thy experience again. Weakness in the body arises also from this sign, and becomes even as the quicksands that are neither solid nor yet water, neither possessed with that other than fear. Let not thy heart be troubled, ye believe in God, believe also in him who is able to quicken the life as it flows through thy body, thy mind, thy soul, to a full regeneration in the material world, then hope in the mental, then truth in the spiritual. For, he is truth, and the light, the way, that each soul may find the way from the darkness back to God, even as he. In Neptune again we find those as make for mysterious experiences that make for tiredness at times, and an inner longing for those activities that will bring more harmony, more peace, more joyous understanding. As has been given, these are as tendencies in the innate experience of the entity. As to what and as to how the entity reacts to these influences in the present is as to what will be the outcome, and as to how and why the experience or journey through life is made worthwhile, or as to whether the whole consciousness is able to be raised to that knowledge of the life in self as brings the full experience of having done his service throughout. Will the entity, if the entity will turn for a period into the secret chambers of the mental vision, into the purposes, aims, desires as are created by the activities of the physical being in the way and manner the life is conducted for the service of others, there will be seen that the promises as have been made from the beginning to the children of men, that lo, I am with thee, even unto the end of the world, are being fulfilled in that as is being accomplished, and that as the raising of the serpent in the wilderness brought that of the saving from the conditions round about, so raising of that consciousness in the heart brings that understanding that those things of the past are as was given, let the dead bury the dead, and that the raising of regeneration will come in the way that brings healing in the wings, and that many call thee blessed for the activities. That there are those stumbling blocks that make for fear, for doubts that arise, is apparent through the experiences that in the present make for those innate fears. Yet is that trust if that trust is wholly put in him, and knowing that he that aideth a brother, a fellow sufferer, lendeth to the Lord all, will be well. Keep the ways thou hast set in thine own heart, thine own purposes, for these will not only bring satisfaction, but will bring that contentment of knowing a life, a service, is spent in raising in the lives, the consciousness, the hearts of men, that which will bring less of suffering, more of joy, less of disturbing influences, more of peace, less of that makes afraid, more of that gives a stout, strong body-mind, body-heart, in the light, life, and service of him that is given, that, the way ye know, the place ye know, for I go to the Father, and what ye ask in my name, that will be accomplished in thee, in the way, in the manner, as he seest thou hast needs of. Then, keeping that knowledge, keeping that way, there must come those awakenings, little by little, line upon line, precept upon precept, example upon example. For as the wearying and wearing away of self in his service, the strength will come, in him, who is faithful in that, if thou wilt be my people, I will be thy God. In those of the Neptune, we find water and waters, with the symbols of same, being the inner influence in the entity's application of those higher elements of love and nobleness. Hence we find, while mysticism is interesting, and the entity often audits seeming results in same, symbols, signs, and those elements that have to do with constancy as respecting the changes wrought by such influence, is an element to be reckoned with by the entity. Then, in enchantments the entity might be able to influence many, and as such might hold sway among a certain character of minded individuals, yet the love of the higher forces of the elements of service in same, changes this to where the entity rather abhors those that are of such element alone, as using same and through this may gain for self, a greater understanding of those elements that make for the increase in power of individuality, rather than an individual amassing power over masses, or classes. This well to be studied by the entity. From the sojourns of the entity in Neptune we find rather the influences of water, as well as things coming from water, are a part of the entity's experience. Thus the entity should ever keep a pearl about the self or upon the person, not only for the material vibration, but for the ideal expression. For, it will be an omen, not only because of the vibrations that it may give to self, but because of keeping the even temperament, yea the temper itself. For the entity can get mad, and when it is mad it is really mad. This arises more from the material sojourns than the astrological, for these the entity chose to meet in the material, rather than the fourth and fifth dimensional phase of its activities. Though there are the influences of Neptune as to the mystic activities, we find that these rather will bring water and accidents as related to same, unless there are the precautions respecting same. The entity's urge towards mysterious things may be expressed in the collecting of the unusual pieces that to entity may have the power of acting as a guard or as good luck charms or such in the experience. These are not to be taboo, but rather spiritualized and visualize the material things in respect to same. Coming under the influence of Neptune then, as we find, makes for the mystic forces in the experience of the entity, as liking and loving a mystery, which may be seen even in the development in the tender years, liking to make a mystery of that it finds it is, or those that it would meet, in soft whispers, in creeping about, in finding those varied things that would make for such tendencies, these are quite evident in the present development. To be sure, this gives that indication that there will be that within the experience of the entity in the present, as the air of mystic influences and the attraction for same, which may be enhanced or entirely eliminated by the trend of the development. As may be well understood, and will become gradually more and more understood by the mental mind of man, the developing of the mental attributes of the human family will grow more and more to represent the whole period of transition in the way of developing the human race or family through that known as the form, not of biological, but of sociological conditions in the evolution of man in each experience. So, one that has encompassed or covered the greater period in the developing of the individual entity or soul would be called the old or the more highly evolved or greater developed soul. This one will be unusual. From the astrological aspects, we find Mercury, Venus, Saturn and Jupiter in affliction with Neptune. Then stay away from water, large bodies of water. Be very careful when in swimming, even when you take a bath, that you don't slip and break a bone. For these are afflictions, water, yet water is the mother of materiality. From spirit the activity of mind upon matter brings into being elements, as in evolution, that become manifested in materiality as ye experience in thy chemical studies. In Neptune we find an influence that is most in the making in the present experiences of the entity, so that those things that are mysterious, those things that are psychological, those things pertaining to what to the mental mind of man are the mysteries of life, are ever present and would bring to the experience of the entity in this sojourn much that may be helpful, beneficial, if used or applied aright in the experience of the material things of this entity. But to make personal, material application of the mysteries to many and to this entity may become a stumbling block unless it is left rather in the interpretation of the spirit that is with the soul in its activity. If there is the attempt to interpret or apply in the physical forces the stronger, it makes for that which becomes strange, and they that seek strange gods, strange forces, do so oft to their own undoing. Hence as to the innate urge, rather as has been given, let this mind be in you that was in him, that the Father God is ever present, and has given his angels charge concerning thee, rather than those that may be of thine own making. And his spirit will bear witness with thy spirit whether ye be in that realm where the material, the mental or the spiritual application may be made of that thou experienceth in the mysteries of thine inner self. In Neptune we find those things of the mystic nature, or the mysterious. Hence we find those things that pertain to amulets, charms, or those things that deal with the influence that arises from the environs of certain kinds of music, all become a portion of the entity's experience. Not every character of music, nor every character of writing, nor every character of painting, nor every character of expression of the artistic temperament of individuals or groups, becomes a portion of the entity. Rather does the entity make for the selective influence in such relationships. Yet as we will find, those things that are old, those that are blue, those that are of gold, and those that are new, these should be a portion of the dress or of the environment, whether in the home, in the activity, or in whatever field of expression. These become a portion of the entity for wielding an influence in the manner in which the entity, the soul, gives expression to same in its relationships to its fellow man. What directions can you give me for the pivot or turning point that my life has been undergoing these months, with the planet Neptune? As indicated heretofore, do not attempt to be guided by, but use the astrological influences as the means to meet or to overcome the faults and failures, or to minimize the faults, and to magnify the virtues in self, as may be used through such periods in a propitious way and manner. But through the channels indicated for the present may the greater steps be taken for equalizing and bringing about the better influences in the experience of self. The influences in Neptune make for associations with the mysterious forces in action in the universe, as well as in the experience of self. And the ability to not only control the emotions but also to control the abilities in judgment makes for an individual in the present capable of discernment as to abilities in others and as to what makes for their qualifications in any field of activity. Hence in the position as one to judge those that were being used in material activities or in employment or as to assisting others in finding their place in the activities of a mental or material world would be the greater field of activity for the entity to apply not only the material but mental and spiritual forces in the entity's experience. And this also makes for the attraction to the entity of those that have recently crossed large bodies of water, or for the better activities in the experience of the entity to be near large bodies of water, the interest in those influences in the activities of the mysterious influences. Hence for this body, in its abilities as a rider, to be controlled or influenced by that as may manifest through self would be well few are found that may gain the highest without allowing self's influence to be such as to either make for complete control from without or from the activities of self, to become a mental reaction only. In Neptune we find also that consciousness of one well adapted in the unusual or the mysteries or the mysticism. These again are of the soul and are of the spiritual nature. Then let everything the entity does be done with all good conscience, but this doesn't mean having necessarily thine own way. For as has been indicated, others think as well as self, and there are at times ways that seemeth right, and yet the end thereof may become death. Thus the needs that this entity, as well as every entity, but this entity in its activities especially, be acquainted with, and walk oft in the way of life as manifest in the Christ. As to the experiences in the earth, these, too, are part of that universal consciousness or, as has been indicated, considering both the spiritual, or the emotional of the soul, and the emotional of the body consciousness. While all appearances may not be given, these will indicate the pattern which, as has been indicated, would be given the entity, and the more oft the pattern is analyzed, and the parallel of self's desires and hopes measured with the master, the better and the greater harmony will be the experiences of this entity. How many of the promises do you know? Not merely sayings but as personal promises. Do make thy promises, though in keeping with those promises he made. And the chief of these is, if ye love me, ye will keep my commandments, and I promise that I will come and walk with thee day by day. This is a promise he keeps with those who keep and who love his ways. For his ways are not grievous, though they oft require the bearing of the cross, but it is the only way to harmony and peace in the earth and, to be sure, the only way in the inter-between and the hereafter. Also in Neptune there are brought the watery environs, and the associations with individuals who have had the more effectual activity in the experience of the entity, are those who have recently been across large bodies of water, or who in their sojourns and in their relations one to another, have had dealings with those who have recently been or who are engaged in activities that have to do with the water. There is also the interest in mystery stories, as well as those influences in things that are of the psychic nature. And, if the body applies its abilities as related to the visions in Jupiter and in Mercury and in Neptune, as in relation to that which may be given to others in their understanding or application of things pertaining to the mysteries of life, whether this be from the material, the mental or even the spiritual aspect, it will make for those channels, through which the entity may give not only that which will be the more helpful, but will also, in its application for others, find in self that which will bring to self the satisfaction that comes with the application of the mental influences and abilities in such a way and manner as to make for soul development. For, to the entity, it would require patience in these directions, and as the teacher of old has given, in patience possess ye your souls. This does not mean in bearing with individuals that willfully disobey, but rather being strong and steadfast and humble in the sight of higher forces, yet active in that known to be not only duty in the spiritual sense, but duty in the mental and material sense. For duty and patience are akin, for he that grows weary in well-doing, or who falters and faints and gives up, is not worthy of those things that may be his lot, or his niche or his channel in bringing to pass into the material manifestations, those things that the higher influences, or even the angels of light, have had orders to prepare for those that love his ways. The inclination of the entity from the natures of Neptune is for psychic influences or forces to arise. Hence we will find that certain characters of waters as springs, lakes, rivers become as music in the creative forces, through which the entity may employ words to show the attunement to which the soul may arise in giving expression. Sky and sea become rather as distant, yet these are as the background of much when it comes to that which would be tumultuous in the expressions of the emotions that are aroused from the sojourns in the earth. Hence we have found, in the experience of the entity, those conditions where the astrological influences from the innate urges and the influences from the sojourns in the material plane, from which the emotions of the consciousness arise, have become conflicting at times, yet at others rather in unison of purpose and activity. We will find, then, while the innate or the psychic forces of self will find expression from the astrological urges, the material sojourns bring the characterization of expression by the entity in the material application of the ideas or ideals to be depicted or expressed. Hence we will find the urges from the sojourns in the earth, bringing an awakening through the dreams, as it were, not in those periods when sleep or that sense of aloofness arises, but when the unconsciousness of a consciousness arises which brings rather the vividness of beauty of expression. These bring a part of the entity into its abilities for expression. Neptune brings also comforts, not in material things, rather in the spiritual and the inclinations produced in the experience of the entity, as the emotions or interests in those things of a psychic or spiritual nature. Here, psychic in its interpretation should be of the soul, and not of disincarnate entities. We find such experiences are brought from these innate influences, that are signs or omens or directions, hence have nothing to do other than pointing the way. For while one may be influenced by such signs, the very will is that which makes for the choice itself, which is in its essence the gift of the Creator, that the soul might choose to be one with that which is everlasting, which is and can be only constructive, born of what may be truly said to be the fruits of the Spirit of truth itself, as long-suffering, patience, kindness, brotherly love. Not envying, not making for strife for that which would even make any soul afraid. These are then those things that, grown to fruition and applied in the daily experiences and associations one with another, bring into the heart and soul of an entity that peace which he, the loving brother, gave. My peace I leave with thee, not as the world knoweth peace, but my peace, that comes of love, of patience, of those things known as the virtues in the experience. These applied give and make their growth for each soul. Neptune and the will and ideals. From the influence in Neptune, or the water sign, we find the quick perception and the intuitive abilities, also the interest in those things of the unseen forces or powers we find innate in the experience. As to how and in what manner the influences that arise from these are to be applied, surely depends upon that which the entity has used and will use as its standard, its ideal. Not mere ideas, but there are ideals spiritual, ideals mental, ideals that have been attained in the material manifestations. What are thine? Answer these from within thine own self, not as others may indicate. For thy relationship to creative forces, to the now, to the future, to the past, is as one in thine own application. For ye are, as every entity, the result of that ye have applied and do apply in thy experience of that thou hast chosen as thy ideal. Make sure it is founded in that which is eternal. In summing the influences from the astrological sojourns, then which arise, as may be said, from the innate. The entity is sensitive, owing to the high mental as well as the artistic abilities. For the influences from Venus as well as the sensitive forces from the mystical Neptune and the occult from the Uranian and the extremes become a part of the entity's activities. Hence keep them attuned to an ideal. Not as energies but as purposes within thine own self. And ye will find that ye will grow in the knowledge of, as well as in the ability to apply the beauties not only of nature, but the expression of same in the human emotions, just as the experiences in the earthly sojourns give rather the expression through the emotional influences. For ye are body, mind, soul. The astrological express or manifest through thy mind the impressions, thought, influences as may waft themselves by emotions expressed in others. Then, this might be a warning as to those with whom the entity associates, or may associate. Do not choose as companions those too highly emotional. Do not choose those influences that are too highly influenced by the Martian forces or Mars or wrath or extremes in the activities who indulge in gratifying of material forces. And see in those with whom the entity may associate and look for the harmonies as may be expressed in the mental emotions rather than the physical emotions of the body. Neptune, from this sojourn we find influences pertaining to things of the mystical nature. Hence the inclination for the entity to be speculative or to speculate in ways that may not always be wise. But if the activities are in relationships with peoples, having to do with things that come over, or pass through, or grow in water, then much more easily will there be found harmony in the activities if the speculative influences will be resisted oft in the experience. From the astrological sojourns, then, we find both good and bad influences, to be sure, but the outcome of such is dependent upon what is the ideal in relationships to things, to individuals, to purposes, to spiritual imports. Know that the ideal must ever be founded upon something that is continuous, and only the spirit is continuous. For, all that is of a material or of an earthy nature must pass away. Only purpose that is creative, that is prompted by truth as founded in spiritual things, spiritual activities, spiritual relations, continues. To be sure, man in a material world needs to have that activity which will bring things of a material nature into his experience, but let these be as a result of the expression or manifestation founded in spiritual things and purposes, and not as the primary purpose alone. For, if there will be the success that will live on, the material results must be founded upon creative influences and forces. In this characterization of an ideal may the entity meet and make for those developments in the present that are characterized in those influences in Neptune, not as mysteries not understood, but rather as being, living, doing, those things through those channels that brings the understanding of the glorious love of Him, shed in a world of sin. There should be a greater study by the entity of astrological aspects. These are not intended to create confusions in the mind, nor dissuade the entity from an interest or confidence in astrological aspects. But these are merely inclinations, tendencies to the individual entity. The entity has a will of its own. Oft there is much to be gained by resistance of tendencies, as much as there is to be gained by regular exercise to increase or strengthen the muscular physical body. There is the need, the necessity of the mind being ruled or regulated by the will for the same reasons or purposes. These astrological aspects, then, are tendencies. When these are used properly, they are used in their tendencies towards creative things and resisted or made creative by the will when they indicate negligence or any phase of non-creative activities.